Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Today's video, we're going to be finishing up this lime plaster application. And as I mentioned in previous videos, we're not doing a traditional plaster installation. You're going to see us combining some of the finishing steps. So what would normally be a float coat, brown coat, and then you'll do a scouring process where you rub that in and put your finish coat on. We kind of combine some of those, but you'll see what we're talking about when this process is played out on the video.
I don't think we had this near wet enough, because this is, the moisture is getting sucked out of it so fast. Once I get it up there, I can't spread it. So what this is telling me is when we finally do get back to the garage,
We're gonna have to use a water hose?
we're gonna probably have to wet it down for 2 days before we even start putting the plaster on it. Because, you know, what I found out in the bedroom closet was a couple of thinner layers works out better, but if it's sucking the moisture out so fast that we can't spread it, then that becomes not an option.
Now you're seeing me throughout this process stop and start spraying water on the scratch coat and then continuing to put on the finish coat. And when you're putting on the finish coat, you can feel the way that the trowel is dragging, and you can feel and see how the plaster is moving around, that the previous coats will start pulling the moisture out of it, and you'll know that it's time to go back and wet that down again to start putting the plaster back on for the whatever coat you're working on.
Well, we're gonna have probably close to 10 gallons of plaster in this wall when we're done with it.
In this wall?
Mm-hmm. Well, because this is the first coat after the scratch coat. I'm halfway through with this bucket almost. We put more than 5 gallons on it on the bare block, and there's probably going to be just a little bit of this bucket left after I do the second coat. crap that's in that sand.
Here, you want me to?
All right. Let this dry a little bit, go load some hay, then I'll come back and finish it.
Do I need to spray it down or anything?
No, it needs to dry a little bit.
Okay.
To use your clay term, it needs to be leather hard.
Leather hard.
But what I found is that it kind of needs to be moist leather, like when I'm doing tooling.
This scouring process compresses this layer of plaster, and it also helps you get a smoother finish, because rubbing this float in a circular motion with a little bit of moisture on there kind of moves it around, fills in low spots, and will help you take down high spots. And you'll see me as I'm going through here turning it on edge and kind of putting the edge of that float against the wall. And what I'm doing is getting the built up plaster off and using it to fill in a low spot. Then we tried this originally with wood floats, and the only thing that we could get locally was, from a local hardware store, and the grain on them was just terrible, because the floats, as they got wet, they bowed, and we found ourselves gouging this surface pretty bad. So I got online and I found these poly floats, and these things worked fantastically well. Because we're not doing a full 3-coat system applying this plaster, there are places where, as I'm using the float and scouring this in, low spots are appearing that I cannot move the plaster on the wall around sufficiently to fill in. So you'll see me taking this margin trowel and a little dab of plaster, putting in the low spot, and then scouring that in. And it worked great and did not have any effect really negatively on the finished product. This burnishing process is using a trowel to smooth the surface, give it a very, very slight polish the way we're doing it, and just give it a better looking appearance. The process, when you put the little bit of water on there and start burnishing it with the trowel, brings a little bit of lime to the surface and just smooths it out and makes it look better. This trowel we're using is a Japanese trowel, that is a lot more flexible, and it's stainless steel. The other trowels you'll see us using for this process are specifically Venetian plaster trowels, and they're a little stiffer. They're also made out of stainless steel. What we found is that if you try to do this with carbon steel trowels, it leaves a black streak where the material is being abraded off of the trowel onto the surface of your plaster. We found that doing the scouring and burnishing steps in stages as we worked across these walls worked out a lot better than trying to do all of the scouring and then coming back and doing the burnishing. Because what was happening is that the plaster that you needed to burnish was drying out too fast after the scouring stage to make the burnishing look right. So it was just easier to take it in, comfortable sized chunks and work all across the surface we were trying to get done. My wife is covering this wall with a light plastic drop cloth so that we can slow down the evaporation of moisture out of this finished layer of plaster. And what we noticed is that we would see a differential drying, especially since we had the wood stove going to keep the house warm. The heat would gather up against the ceiling and it would dry out the top part of the wall faster than the rest of it. So as we saw that happening, we would pull this plastic back a little bit and lightly mist it with water to get it to dry out evenly over the entire surface as best we could.
So since this plaster has set for, what, a week now?
Yeah.
And dried out, in order to put the finish coat on, we've got to, wet everything down, or it'll suck the moisture out of what you're putting on too quickly, and it starts setting up to the point you can't work it. So I'm going around and wetting all of this down. Libby has already wet it down once, and I will probably end up doing it several times over the course of putting this plaster on. And you can feel, I think I mentioned when I was doing the living room scratch coat, you can feel when it starts kind of becoming hard to work, that your moisture is getting sucked out too quickly. And the other thing that happens when the moisture gets sucked out of this, there's no lubrication for your tools to glide over it. And it actually, because of the sanding, it starts abrading the tool and leaving dark marks on the plaster. The way we're finishing this is not typical, because normally you would do a float coat, wait for it to get leather hard, take a double float, scratch it, and then come back and do a third finishing coat. Because we're not trying to make this perfectly flat, smooth, and plumb like you would drywall or like Georgian plaster, we're doing basically 2 coats back to back and making them visually flat and appealing.
So, I will have to watch you with the process because I have not really seen this process before I start.
Okay.
Or is it that you're just putting on a thin coat?
Yes, more or less. Yeah, I mean.
So putting on a thin coat.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna need your table here.
So then I'm not going to get down.
You will not get down until you are finished.
All I'm doing is getting the line up close to the ceiling, or up at the ceiling, that I can then use a trowel and come out running parallel to the ceiling, so that I know that's basically flat, and then that gives me something to work to. Oh, good Lord, this stuff is drying out
Yeah,
quick.
it is.
I mean, quick. We might need to close that door. I mean, basically, as soon as we get it on here, it's too dry to work.
Yeah. That's what I discovered.
Holy crap. Alright, well, I'm gonna finish what I'm doing, and then I'll just have to come back and skim coat, try to flatten it out. I don't remember which wall it was I was working on, but it may have been the one in the pantry. Basically, before I started putting stuff on, I had to spray
Yeah.
every stroke. I may have to do this a little bit different. I'm just going to start getting the first coat on here and let it do what it's going to do, and then I'll worry about flattening it out and cleaning it up on the second coat, because this is just going on too dry. And
Well, once I get this done, do you just need me to come in front of you and?
I don't know. Once I get the first coat on, it'll be fine because it doesn't suck it up as bad. And the thing is, you've got to keep where you're overlapping any place pretty wet so it'll bond. Because otherwise you'll end up, it'll delaminate like that, some of that other stuff did. This is going to take a lot of work to finish.
So are we thinking the more rustic the better?
Because there's rustic and then there's, oh, that looks like crap. How thick are you putting that on as the first coat?
Not very.
Okay, because what you're doing here is you're overlapping back and forth on top of each other. So this is going to be a mountain, that's going to be a volcano because of that hole in the middle. So try to work from you can work off and back on, and it prevents some of that. Or if you're starting back close to where you're on it, you need to get off immediately. Don't let it build up.
Okay.
Some places it works better for me to start off and go back on. Some places the other way. I don't know what the right, in air quotes, answer is, but.
So is that stuff up there too rough and or, I mean?
Well, honey, it's the first coat. It's gonna have to be
Not something I can
straightened up anyway.
really do about it right now.
Well, the only thing you can do about it right now, which I don't think is necessary, but see, that shows you where your highs and lows are.
Okay, well, how do
You know, I wouldn't, honestly, I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay. Just
Because
finish
we've
it
got to
and
fill,
let's-
yeah, we got to fill that later anyway. But see, that's what happens
Alright,
when you
and
get
bring that other,
higher, you know. I mean, even when you wet this to the point of it running down the wall, it doesn't run very far. I tell you what, some of those guys that I watch their videos and the websites and stuff out of England, they're like, oh yeah, you gotta let this stuff dry for like 10 days before you can even put the next coat on. I don't know, it must be a reflection of the humidity and the temperature in England.
yeah.
And see, it's drying out so fast, it does not take much to get a lot of buildup on there because it just stops moving.
Yeah. Woo!
Okay, well, you know what happens now?
What?
You start going right back over it.
With another layer of plaster. Okay. Okay.
And
this time, I'm trying to get it as smooth and even a coat as possible.
you need to pay attention to your highs and lows. And I would say as fast as this is drying out, you probably are going to want to work basically from this corner break here up, fill that in, and then do the finishing on it, and then work your way down as fast as this is drying out. And I don't know
Still
how.
wet it down.
You're probably going to have to. Not as much, but. And I don't know how much or how these Chinese trowels are going to work in comparison to the one Japanese trowel that costs the same as these two Chinese trowels. Ooh, they have little edge protectors on them. So, do you want me to do some of that so you get a feel for what it takes?
Sure. I mean, am I?
Or do you want to put the first skim coat on and then I'll show you what it takes to do the finishing process?
Well, does it need to be kind of worked at the same time?
No.
So.
No, I would say just get your plaster on, come down a little below this
Okay.
line, and then, but it doesn't take near as much on this coat as it did on the last coat, which doesn't take near as much as it did on the scratch coat.
Okay. So we're just trying to get it as even as possible. No valleys, no humps. Okay.
And you may find that a square edge, stiffer trowel is easier. And the thing is, once it sucks the moisture out of it, even spraying water on it doesn't make it workable again. We probably should have started spraying this down yesterday. I'm about halfway done, I'm gonna use this whole gallon of water. And that other small jug. Anyway, what this is gonna show you is your high and low spots. And you can feel them as you're
I'm listening.
as you're going across here. Like you've got a high spot right
you
against the
can feel
ceiling.
it.
Where's your little? No, not that thing.
This.
Yeah. Not that one. And because this is going to be about the same consistency as what's already on the wall, I start by kind of scraping this off.
Okay.
And using it to fill in the low spots. And then if that's not enough, I'll dip in the bucket.
Okay.
But there was, obviously a low spot right there. You see there's another one right there.
Okay.
And a lot of times, just what's on the edge of this float is enough to fill, small places, not
Mountain Dew for this, but, okay, dear, let me go on what I'm doing.
Okay, well, as soon as you get it to this point,
Yeah,
then you need to trowel it. Because once it dries and sets rough like that, you're not gonna come back and trowel
okay,
it. Okay, so
so now,
let
is
me
is
finish
that what
this
you-
section and then
Okay.
I'll show you that.
Okay,
Now, see how when I did that, it shows you where the low and high is?
yeah,
And you can kind of feel where you got high spots because you can feel this thing rocking
Yeah.
under your hand. And because it's wide and flat, it'll shave those down as you go across.
and put some of the extra into those.
Right.
Okay,
But
so
if you
is that a halfway decent job of,
Yes.
okay, of actually the first two coats?
Yeah.
Okay, good, okay, that's helpful. So I know how much, you know, you're putting on, so.
The first coat is really just closing up
Yeah,
that scratch coat. And you know, from down here you can see your low spot. And when you go back to fill those in, don't start off to the side and push it because you'll just shove it back out of your hole. Kind of put the float over
Yeah.
the top of it and start smearing
Push
it
it in.
around.
plus it probably
Press it.
sands off the, yeah,
That's as good as I've been getting it.
okay,
And so the next step, we're gonna try this clean lane trowel out here. Is to start bringing the lime, the cream to the top and pushing all of those grains of sand down. And so I usually end up misting it with water till I see what it's gonna do. And if you will start up in your corner, be that the ceiling or the wall or whatever, and work your way out, you can see what, you know, you'll start seeing that lime come to the surface. And this is probably not the best place to start learning this. But you kind of do it in a semicircular motion,
okay,
and you can feel the suction underneath of it, how flat you're putting it. And what'll happen, because the grains of sand, it'll put little wavy lines in it. But as you keep going and change directions, it'll bring those out, they'll come out. And the lime, what I try to do is get it so that there's not big lines of it and obvious chunks of it or you know, places where it's obvious
so keep moving it
sitting
around.
on the surface. Well, but you will reach a point where it's saturated, you've closed up the pores as much as it's going to, and you can't get any more in.
And it's,
So what I usually do is just scrape it off on the edge of the bucket, mix it back in the plaster. But when you got that lime, that cream, can you see that rough
Yeah.
spot right there? You can see how it's stuck to the trowel. You can work that in and it'll close those up.
so, good on the first coat, good on the second coat.
Yeah. When you get ready to start rubbing the section below this, I've been coming back onto where I was working with the float.
Just a little bit.
Just, you know, probably about this far,
Okay.
just because that gets rid of that line between the two sections. So see how now I'm not getting a big mess of that?
Yeah, on the edge.
And now everything is kind of pressed down, so you're not getting as many of those wavy lines in there. So.
Big line texture.
That's actually pretty good try. And you may, you know, want to try out these other ones. This square one without the edges round, or out the corners rounded off, I think will have a tendency to dig in. But this is your little favorite pool tile. So, anyway.
So, can I go ahead and work this?
I would do about down to your waist
Okay.
until you kind of figure it out.
Okay. So, it does need to dry a little bit.
But not a lot.
Not a lot.
And if you put that float on there and it's really, really sticky and it starts pulling it back off, then you need to wait a couple minutes. But I've always, you know, yes, that's happened, but usually before I'm done with the section, I'm having to spray it to get it to move the stuff around.
Okay. Ready to wet.
And if you don't want to press real hard, just
No, I'm just trying to float it. Seems like this is wanting to stay quite a bit wet.
yeah. That's the last place you worked in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alright, is that too much? I mean,
No. It's fine. Okay, I'd stop because you're getting into where you haven't put anything. And as much as you got built up in the corners, if you don't have any holes to fill, scrape the float off in the bucket and then take the float and run up those edges and get that stuff picked off of there. And the reason I said use the float is because you're less
It's
likely to
softer.
dig in.
yeah. Making me nervous.
Why?
Because I don't want to ruin it.
I think it's a closet.
Because you're giving me permission to do it.
Well, yeah, the more you do, the less I have
So, are you saying I need to get better or work great? Let's see.
to do. Yeah. It's all about incentive structures at this point.
Okay.
Now, go back and get that goober hanging on the side there. There you go. Because otherwise you'll get mad and smear it in. Now, since you're going to start up there where you finished the last route, you probably want to mist that with a little bit of water. as wet as the stuff is down here, you probably aren't gonna need to. And
But right on.
yeah, and if you go ahead, because this is pretty fresh, do the whole thing and then go back over it to start smoothing everything out and filling in your stuff. Not that much, just. I didn't say shower, I said mist it.
And here, I'm just pressing hard enough to.
You'll feel it. But I usually start in the corners and work my way out because then I can clean that up. Yeah. And you want to try, now what you may want to do, as much stuff as there is on there, is flip it around this way and go down. No. To kind of clean that out. And then get your corner in there and work that down. And see, since you're going against drywall, unless there was a big gap there, it's not as bad. It's harder to cut into it. But if it's two plaster corners meeting together, what the aggravating thing for me is you clean up one side, well then you're cutting into the other side, and then you gotta come back and fill that. Okay, are you getting much lime worked up on that?
Well, I was starting to.
Yeah, okay, you need more water. Start on that down here and work back up onto that. Cause see how you got that line right there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just don't want to overwork it, you know?
So if you'll and you can control by how much you angle that trowel, how much you're pulling up versus how much you're pressing in. And what I usually do to get the line started coming is work it more on the edge, and then once that, you start flattening it out and working it in. But bigger motions gives you a smoother overall surface because you're not like, you know.
All right, so we've got a transition there, so do I
Yeah.
need to go back?
Oh, you can if you want to, it's the closet. Doesn't matter. But if, the other thing you can do with that is sometimes you can take one of these stiffer Venetian plaster trowels and you can get in there and push that down because you can get more on it. But the problem with these is and they start leaving that gray on there if you're digging too hard. See, that's why I like that Japanese trowel, because it doesn't seem to leave those gray marks on there like these did. You cause yourself way too much stress.
I've been given permission to do this, so I'm trying to.
I I didn't give you permission. You just were willing to help.
Well,
And besides that, my skill level is nowhere near at a level where I should be given permission for anybody to participate in this.
come take a look at that, see what you think. Before I start the next.
Pretty good to me. I mean, no worse than the stuff I've been doing. And in some ways, it's trying to be better. Because you're being a lot more careful, I'm being a lot more trying to get it done.
I wonder what kind of plastic this is.
Polyurethane. Yes, at this point, I'm just trying to get it on the wall. I'll straighten it out on the next one. Yeah.
clear.
All right, this is a lot darker than it'll be when it dries, but that's job complete. The process today probably took about between 6 and 7 hours, doing the inside, the end wall in the closet, and then doing this whole thing. I don't know if that's fast, I don't know if it's slow, that's just about what it normally takes us to get one of these walls done. The process that you saw us do is a very modified process from what is considered normal or proper. Normally you do a scratch coat, you wait, till it dries, come back, then you do a float coat, which they spend a lot of time, the guys that actually do this for a living, getting that flat and plumb and so on and so forth. And you let that dry after you scratch it with a devil's float. Then you come back and you put your finish coat on. Partially because we're under a time crunch and partially because I don't want to do it that way. We basically do both the float coat and the finish coat at one time. We do a skim coat or a thin coat over the top of the scratch coat, then come back and do what would be considered the finish coat. I have the stuff, to make a really fine finish plaster, but we actually kind of like the look of this with just the sand in it. So, we're gonna see how it goes, try to get it finished, get the bank off our back, and then if we want to experiment a little bit with the finer marble dust finish coat plaster, more of a Venetian style plaster, then we may do that later. But that's what it looks like. We've got another wall like this to do on the other end of the house. The living room, portion of the wall in the kitchen, the garage to do the second coat on, and 2 walls upstairs over the garage. So we've got about, what would that be? 1, 2, 3, 4. We got about another week of doing this to get it done. And I don't know how much. I thought I'd show you what this looks like after it's completely dry. All the touch up on the drywall has been done, trims up, the finished product. Pay no attention to the mess all around it. We're still trying to get our possessions unpacked and put away. But you can see that it dries a lot lighter than what that finish coat was when we first got it put on. And it's, like I said, it's a rustic finish. It's more in line with like a Marmorino, I think is what they would call it, or the Stucco Rustico. We're actually a little finer finish than that, but we like it. All right, folks, I think that's going to wrap up the plaster portion of this house build, at least from y'all's perspective. And we're going to move on to some other things. I had some questions about the ceiling on the last video, so that's probably what I'll put up next. But thanks for watching, and y'all have a good day.